Hey there, it's Ed Rush, five-time #1 best-selling author and former F-18 fighter pilot. And today, you're going to learn how to go big, how to attract the right kind of people while simultaneously repelling the wrong, while accomplishing the mission that God's given you to accomplish on this earth. So, what do you do when you have 10 seconds to live? What do you do when you have 10 seconds to live? You know, I was faced with that decision back on a hot July night in 1999. That's when I was about to execute my first night carrier landing. Now, some of you know I was a Marine F-18 pilot, but you know, as a Marine pilot, we did all of our training for the first 3 years in the Navy. When you're in the Navy, you're flying with an instructor in your backseat in these small little propeller-driven airplanes, and then these small little jets, and then these bigger jets, and finally you're there in your actual airplane, the F-18, to go do your carrier landing training. Now, there are a bunch of countries that land on carriers, you know, England, India, China, just to name a few, but the only country that does it at night is the United States of America. So there I was in my F-18 all alone. And you're wondering, all alone? Wait a second, Ed, didn't you just say that you had an instructor in your backseat? Well, yeah, almost every single flight in training, you have an instructor in your backseat, but when you go to land on the aircraft carrier at night, you're all alone. I don't know what the deal is. Maybe it's like a risk mitigation thing or something, but there I was on that particular night, about 20 miles behind the carrier that I was going to land on, flying at about 300 miles an hour directly at that carrier and at about 1,500 feet above the water. It was a beautiful night. The stars were out, the moon was out, everything was amazing except for over the ocean, there was a very thick overcast cloud layer that started at about 700 feet above the water and ended at about 1,200 feet above the water. That thick overcast cloud layer is a very typical marine layer that we have here in San Diego, and that night it would cause a particular problem for me. It shouldn't have. I had learned to train in the Marine Corps for years to fly through the clouds using the instruments on my airplane and coming out safely again. But on that night, as I descended into the clouds at 1,200 feet, now at about 300 miles an hour, and about 10 miles behind the aircraft carrier, a condition came upon me which can only be described as vertigo. Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced vertigo before, but the best way for me to define it is if I was to take you in this room right here, blindfold you, spin you around about 20 times and then stop. That dizzy, disoriented feeling, that's vertigo. And in a room like this, or where you're watching this, vertigo can be very disorienting. Vertigo can even be nauseating, but vertigo won't kill you. But when you're in an airplane that's flying 300 miles an hour over the Pacific Ocean at now 1,100 feet, vertigo can kill you in an instant. What I felt in my airplane that night was a gentle rolling sensation to the left. Now, what does every good pilot do when you feel your airplane moving left? You take the control stick and you start to move it to the right. And that's when I looked up at my heads-up display, my primary instrument that tells me whether I'm turning left, climbing, descending, or turning right. And according to that instrument, I'm flying perfectly straight and level. Now, at this point, the rolling sensation picks up, now harder and harder to the left. And as I go to move my control stick to the right, I look up at my heads-up display, and of course, it tells me that I'm flying perfectly straight and level. At this point, my brain is screaming at me, roll right, you're gonna die. And it's everything I can do, literally everything I can do not to take my control stick and move it now violently to the right. And it's in this exact moment that as sweat is pouring down my face, as my stomach is in a knot and my feet are actually bouncing off of the cockpit floor, I'm so nervous that at any moment I'm going to die. It's at this exact moment that I hear a voice. And that voice said 3 simple yet profound words. That voice said, trust your instruments. Trust your instruments. You know, that was the voice of my instructor. In my head, it was the memory of my instructor who had been told by his instructor, who had been told by her instructor, who had been told by his instructor, all the way back to the beginning of instrumented flight. My instructor said to me, Head, that was my call sign, Head, you will fail in this airplane. You will make mistake after mistake after mistake, but this airplane's instrument is rock solid. You know he was right about that? I flew over 2,000 tactical hours. Tactical errors, too. Well over 2,000 tactical errors. 2,000 tactical hours in fighter aircraft. And that instrument never failed me, not once. My instructor said, trust your instruments. And so when battling with vertigo that night, I had a decision. I could trust myself, or I could trust my training. I could trust everything that I knew to be true, or I could trust my instruments. You see, trust your instruments was a foundational principle. It was one of those things that everyone knew because you needed to know it. You know, there's a verse in the old history songbook in the Psalms, Psalm 11:4, that says, if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? It's a verse about the foundational principles of a society. And you know, there does come a point when the foundations are completely destroyed that the good people like you, the righteous people who want to see things change, can do nothing. We haven't gotten there yet as a culture, but we're definitely getting there closer. But right now, there is something you can do. You can get your message out there. You can communicate with vision and passion and change the world. So let me give you just a few quick tips on how to do that. Let's go to the board. All right, so we're over here on the whiteboard. I want to share with you 3 main ways that you can focus on the mission that God gave you and accomplish it with rapid speed and agility. And the first one is what I just mentioned, which is to focus on the mission. This is interesting. You know, I work with entrepreneurs. I've worked with over 450 entrepreneurs one-on-one. And when I ask the entrepreneurs I work with, for example, let's say they're in the business of offering products and services online and selling events, and I ask them, listen, how much time a week do you spend getting new leads and new customers? I will tell you that over the entrepreneurs I've worked with, I work with millionaires and people who've had $40 million plus industries, they'll tell me the number is so low. In fact, the average number that I've heard from the folks that I've worked with has been about 7%. Well, listen, if you're an entrepreneur, one of your jobs is to go out and to get new leads and new customers, because if your product really changes lives and can change the world, you're going to want more people to get into it. Now, I don't know what your mission is. Your mission may be to reach more people with your message. Your mission may be to grow a following. Your mission may be like mine, to help transform world governments. Whatever your mission is, your job is to focus. In fact, a better word might be to obsess about your mission. That, by the way, is a word that people don't like to use very much. So, for example, one of the things that I do to focus on my mission is I have a technique called first and 10, last and 10. First and 10, last and 10 goes like this. First 10 minutes of every single day, wake up. You're focused only 10 minutes. Those first 10 minutes, not only, first 10 minutes, your only thought is to focus and think about the mission that you have on this planet Earth. Same thing before you go to bed, last 10 minutes. Focus only on that mission. I'll tell you, you know that first and 10, last and 10 starts to work when you wake up, when you're asleep, you start dreaming about what your mission is. Another one of my techniques is 1 hour a day. Literally set aside nothing more than 1 hour a day to focus and execute on the mission that God's given you. So, for example, maybe your mission is to write a book. Well, the book's not going to write itself without you writing it. So for 1 hour a day, could you focus on the content of the book? Maybe your job right now is to go out and build a following on LinkedIn. So 1 hour a day, your job is to build a following on LinkedIn. Maybe your job is to develop an amazing speech for this weekend, and you're going to spend 1 hour a day focusing on your mission. You know, as a Marine fighter pilot, our job was always the mission. Our job was always the target. And because our job was always the target, everything we did from the briefing to the debriefing of flights had to do with the target. Step number 1 is to focus on your mission. Step number 2 may surprise you. Step number 2 is to attract and repel. You're like, wait a second, Ed. Hold on. We live in a very divergent world. You know, we live in a world with people like all over the place. Why wouldn't I want to attract and attract? Well, the truth is, your message, much like anyone's message, is designed for a specific audience. You will know, even if you go back to the beginning of the New Testament, you can see the stories about how Jesus went and spoke, and he would say one thing, and 50 people would come attract to him, and 2 or 3 people over there would be like, nah, I'm good, and walk away or even be critical. You know, powerful messages are always intended to attract and repel, and here's why. On a scale of 1 to 10, when people first hear about you, in 10 being like, you know, your biggest fans, and 1 being people could care less, on a scale of 1 to 10, most people come in at about a 2, okay? That's ambivalence. That's people who aren't even that interested, but they just heard about you. Not like we just heard about you just a little bit, okay? Now, when you communicate in such a way that it pushes it a little bit, in other words, you communicate the truth so powerfully that it actually moves people to action one way or another. When you do that effectively, there are going to be people, and I know you've experienced this before, maybe after a talk, after you wrote a book, after you did some sort of video. There are people who come up to you and they're like, dude, I don't know what the deal was, but you were talking to me, okay? Or if you're a dudette, I don't know what the deal is, but you ever had that when somebody come up to you and they're like, you were speaking directly to me. What you just did is you took a 2 and you made a 2 into an 8, 9, or a 10, okay? That's because you spoke in such a way that moved them to action, okay? So you took it 2, you made them into an 8, 9, or 10. Let me explain what 8, 9, or 10 does. I do live streams quite a bit. So I'm online where there's a comments tab on my daily show on EdTalks Live. Some of you have seen a chat. It's got a chat that while I'm teaching, like people are talking, okay? That's dangerous in a world like this because there's a lot of haters out there, okay? So here's what happens. If you have 8, 9s, and 10s that follow you, occasionally I'll get somebody that'll jump in the chat and they'll just be all nasty. This is some big scam. All this guy wants is money. I will literally have my customers, okay, the people who've paid me for my products and services and coaching, I will literally have my 8, 9s, and 10s without me even asking, go and be like, you don't understand, Ed is the best. You know, like they're defending me. That's what you get when you get an 8, 9, or a 10. You get an advocate for life. But what you also get when you speak to attract and repel is you turn some people into 1s. Now, here's the thing you need to know. If you're a business owner, the 1s were never going to buy from you anyway. If you're a pastor, the 1s were never going to stick around anyway. They're going to be your biggest problems. If you're a thought leader, the 1s were never going to take action on anything you taught. So you're not losing anything, taking them from a 2 to a 1, except for the fact that they might just be a little bit critical of you. So for example, my book on Amazon right now has, I think, something close to 300 reviews. Right now, I've got about 8% of my reviews. I can't even believe it, by the way. 8% are 1-star reviews. Well, guess what? I've sold almost 30,000 copies, I think over at this point, 30,000 copies of this book. Well, that's what you get when you have that many books that are sold. You do get a couple 1s, but when you get some 1s, you get a lot of 8, 9s, and 10s. And I've had people's lives transformed and have come to my events and become coaching members and followed me for years because they turned into 8, 9s, or 10s. That's number 2. Number 3, on your way to greatness, you've heard this one before, is to go big, okay? My goal, really simple, is to help you set goals that are flat out impossible and ridiculous, okay? Here's what I mean by ridiculous. One of my goals is I want to live vibrantly to be 145 years old. Now, when I say that goal to people, most people laugh. They chuckle, like they think I'm joking, but I'm not joking. I'm actually saying like I'd like to live to be at least 145 years old vibrantly. Now, the interesting thing is some of my clients are regenerative health doctors or naturopathic doctors. And when I tell them, they say, hey, what are your goals? I say, one of my goals is to live to be 145 years old. And you know what I tell them that? You know what they all do? They go, yeah, man, I want to help you do that, because they see the realism in an impossible goal. One of my goals is to be influential in helping cure cancer. Now, I'm not a doctor or a scientist, but I think, man, if I could do something like that, it would be amazing. One of my goals is to completely transform the way the government of the United States leads. That involves another party, a nonpartisan party. In other words, it involves solving our vitriol and anger nationally. Those are huge, huge, huge goals. But why not, man? You only live once. Like, you might as well get out there and flat out get it done. Now, you've heard people discuss the importance of having SMART goals. SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. You know, that's how they would describe. And I'm like, none of that. Don't do any of that. Don't set realistic goals. Why would you do that? Set unrealistic goals. Like, if Henry Ford had set a realistic goal, he would have worked really hard to find a faster horse, okay? But instead, he created something that no one ever thought of before, something that people would have laughed at him as he discussed it. The horseless carriage, what? And Henry Ford, through all the work that he did, George Selden, who actually invented the automobile, and all the ones who came after, completely revolutionized and changed the way we do business. People are alive today because of the value that the automobile brought into our world. This was a person who didn't set realistic goals. But what you should make realistic are your plans. So every one of my big goals has a specific, measurable, achievable plan to get just a little closer there. So for example, one of my plans is to write a book surrounding part of my big mission. That's a plan that's achievable. I can get myself one step closer to my big goal. Okay? So 3 tips. Obsess on your mission. Number 2, communicate in a way that attracts and repels. And number 3, go big. All right, so welcome back. Some key ways to change yourself, to change your message, and to change the world. Now, before we wrap it up today, I owe you something. You see, when I started today, I told you the story about an airplane that was stuck in the clouds and a pilot that was stuck with vertigo. If you'll remember, I was deciding whether to trust my training or to trust my instruments. I'm going to finish that story. It's only about 45 seconds more of that story. But before I do that, some of you have been asking about this, and I want to tell you about a resource that I have sitting right in front of me. This is my latest book. It's called The 21-Day Miracle. The subtitle is How to Change Anything in 3 Short Weeks. This book at one point was the number 22 book over all books on Amazon. It was the single best-selling book in Amazon's business section. It sold well over 30,000 copies and is now just crushing it as an international bestseller. But this isn't about the book, this is about you. And inside of the book, I share my theory that rabbits always win. You've heard the story of the tortoise and the hare and how the rabbit always loses to the tortoise. Well, that doesn't exist in real life. You see, fast rabbits always win. And in the book, I'll show you 10 areas of your life that you can absolutely dominate with just 10 minutes a day for 21 days. These areas include money, mindset, relationships, health, fitness, communication, business, and more. The great news is this book is available at the lowest price I could put it on Amazon, okay? So go to edrushbook.com. That's edrushbook.com. When you go there, you'll see 2 buttons. One will take you right where you can get the book at the lowest price available, and the second place it'll take you is to a membership site that I prepared specifically for you. Now, normally I charge money for my online membership-based content, but for you, you have access, complete access to this membership site. You just need to create a little password-protected profile for yourself, and you'll get access to all the training, all of the tools, and all the supporting documentation behind 21-Day Miracle. The website is edrushbook.com. Now, back to the cockpit. I had a decision to trust myself or my training, to trust everything I knew to be true, or to trust my instruments. And I chose to trust my instruments that night, and it made all the difference in the world. Broke out of the clouds at 700 feet, saw the back of that aircraft carrier, and for a moment breathed a big sigh of relief. Whew, I'm alive. Then I realized I have to land on this thing. Well, just between us friends, it wasn't the nicest landing they had seen that night. In fact, it was one of the worst landings they had seen that entire week. You know, your goal as a pilot is to land in between the second and the third of 4 wires. When you land in between the second and the third wire, that's a perfect landing. You catch the third wire. If you're a little bit short, no big deal. You just catch the second wire. If you're really short, big deal. You catch the first wire. That's a very dangerous landing. But if you're really short, I'm talking about dangerously, life-threatening short, you land about 50 feet away from that first wire and just kind of roll into it, just like I did. To make matters worse, all my friends were sitting up on a place called Vulture's Row, which is like our area where guys can stand outside and watch how horrible their friends' landings are. And all my buddies were sitting up there. That made things even worse. But did I care? No. Why? Because I was alive. Because I was alive to tell the story of a foundational principle called trust your instruments. You know, you have a mission, you have a story or an experience that's going to change the world. So why not start today to take the next step towards going big and accomplishing your dreams, your goals, and your objectives. My name's Ed Rush. The website's below, edrushbook.com. I look forward to getting to know you better, maybe connecting over email, finding more about your mission so that together we can change the world.